Hey, and welcome to the Inclusive Networker Podcast, where we make network marketers, small business owners, and solopreneurs aware of blind spots that could be keeping their networks and businesses small. We give them tips and simple, practical tools to make their businesses more inclusive, and we teach our listeners how to build inclusive communities that support diverse customers, team members, and business partners. So, if you want to authentically build relationships with diverse communities of customers or business partners, you are in the right place. But be warned, you will be challenged, but here's the thing, you won't be judged. I'm your host, Dr. Raymona. I'm a speaker, coach, consultant, public health professor, wife, mom, and a fierce challenger of broken systems that keep people from reaching their highest potential. I'm so excited to be with you on your journey to becoming an inclusive networker. Let's jump right in.
So who are we calling in this week? Who is coming into conversation? Well, it is Sheliza Jamal. I'm so excited to welcome Sheliza to the Inclusive Networker Podcast. So let me tell you a little bit about her. Sheliza Jamal is a graduate of Harvard University and is the founder and executive director of Curated Leadership, Inc., a coaching firm that fosters partnerships with leadership teams, nonprofits, and corporations to develop their knowledge in the areas of equity and diversity to build inclusive communities. She is currently completing her PhD at University of Toronto in the Department of Social Justice Education with a research focus on anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism in teacher education programs. Sheliza brings over a decade of experience in designing curriculum and implementing training and development programs aimed at addressing inequitable outcomes for underserved and equity-seeking communities. She engages participants in dialogue about oppression and uses a calling-in approach to bring people together to listen, learn, and lead with empathy. Sheliza currently serves as a board member of the Harvard Graduate School of Education Alumni Council and is a founding member of the Harvard Alumni Entrepreneurs Council Canada. She is also a board member for Work and Culture. So, Sheliza, welcome to the Inclusive Networker Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, and I love your enthusiasm. It's infectious. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, awesome. Well, let's just jump right in. So tell us about your business. What's the main problem that you solve for your customers or your clients, or tell us a little bit about what you do.
Absolutely. So I was a high school educator for over 10 years, and then I worked in leadership roles within a school board. And when I did my master's, I had some time to test ideas and to test strategies and workshops. And so I've been offering workshops for educators and administrators around diversity, equity, and inclusion, power and privilege, identity. And then when I did my master's at Harvard, I said, let me see how this bites with other folks. So I started running workshops for faculty members and staff and students, as well as faculty members and students across the university in political science at the Harvard Kennedy School, business school, med school. They were just all coming. And it was really exciting because I learned that, okay, this is something that everyone wants to learn about, right? These fundamentals of identity. Who are we? How do we be more inclusive leaders? How do we really think about these principles of diversity, equity, inclusion? What do they mean? How do we embody empathy? And so I started running these workshops over and over again. And when I graduated, my first client was MIT, which was really fortunate of me. From word of mouth, someone I knew who was in the Design Fellows program. And I said, you know what, I think there's a real interest here, and I can have kind of an ownership of delivering some training and development. So I started Curated Leadership after I graduated, and I started out by doing workshops for organizations, for associations, for university staff and faculty. And then I started to grow and do keynotes and do coaching. And something that new that we've been doing recently is supporting organizations with more long-term contracts, doing equity audits of their talent management lifecycle, their HR processes, to ensure that they are actually doing the work that they say they're doing in their DEI mission and values. So really supporting that. So Curated Leadership, as you said earlier in my introduction, is really a coaching firm to help organizations, to help individuals move along to really create true inclusion, right? That sense of belonging that, okay, if you're hiring diverse, if you're marketing diverse, are you actually a place, an organization that creates and fosters belonging for folks once they buy your product or service, once they work at your organization? So that's a little bit about what we do.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you work with teachers and you worked in education, because a lot of times business owners don't think of themselves as teachers and educators. And especially if they're in network marketing, they are teaching other people how to do what they do and how, are you inclusive in that process? And so as we think about someone who is teaching, right, and they're teaching other people in their business, what are the characteristics of a person who's an inclusive leader and an inclusive networker, an inclusive teacher in their business?
Absolutely. I think the first quality would be curiosity. And I think it's so important to be curious, to continue to learn and grow. I really believe that I am a lifelong learner. I believe that I learn something new every single day. I think we all can continue to learn something new every day. And so I think it's really key as an educator, as a coach, as an inclusive networker, to always remain curious so that we don't miss out on the opportunities, the learning that is around us. And so keeping curious, keeping that wondering stance, keeping that learning stance to always grow and fuel and add to our toolkit or our toolbox there. I think that's number one. The second thing I think is creativity. So really quickly, I'll tell you, I was running theater-based embodied empathy workshops on these topics. But guess what? In March 2020, I had to really quickly be creative and pivot to online offerings. At first, I thought, how am I going to create this same sense of embodied empathy? How am I going to teach these same principles virtually? But here I am today, and I'm able to reach people in Europe, in the States, I'm based in Canada, so different provinces in Canada, and I'm able to work with folks across the country, across the continent, in a way that I never thought about before. So I think that creativity is really about how we deliver, how we teach, and knowing that not one consumer, customer, organization, or client is the same. So maintaining that creativity is really, really key in that inclusive networking journey. So creativity and curiosity. The last thing I'd say is, I'm going to stick with the C's here, I think, and just say commitment.
Let's do it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to say commitment. That just came to me because I think it's a long game. And I have worked with clients who want a quick fix. And it doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. In June 2020, we saw an amplification of the Black Lives Matter movement with the murder of George Floyd. And we saw a lot of organizations jumping on these bandwagons. And I want to say, how many folks are actually continuing that work? Are you someone who put a black square up on social media and that was it? Or are you continuously doing this work? And so that commitment is really key because it's a long road. It's not about a destination. It's about a journey. It's about a practice, not a process that just gets us someplace. And that's really, really key. And I think it's also important to remember commitment because it can be difficult. Not everyone is going to connect with your message initially. Maybe not everyone is going to connect with every message that you have out there. Or every client, and that's okay. It's okay to be also selective about who your products and services are going to attract. So I really think that commitment to the long game and this ongoing living, breathing of inclusion is key. So, that curiosity, that creativeness, and that commitment, I would say are really some key qualities and traits that you need as an inclusive networker.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So this is good stuff. So let's unpack this a little bit because I love these three, this curiosity, creativity, and commitment. And a lot of times, okay, let's go with the curiosity. So let's help people to understand what we mean by curiosity, because a lot of times people get this confused because let's give the instance of wanting to touch a Black woman's hair. I'm curious about you. Let me come and just invade your space, right? And want to, learn about you in that way, in a space that's very intrusive, right? So let's talk through, like, what is the difference between that and the kind of curiosity that you mean, so that we're not actually being exclusive when we're being curious about people.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought that up. That is one of the key, things that I talk about. And I'll say, when it's curiosity, it should be about oneself. So if you're curious about natural hair, there is Google for that, folks. So make sure that you're Googling and you're taking that research. I think the key about curiosity is always having an open mind to content that's coming up. So one of the things I do, for example, is I might scroll the internet and subscribe to different newsletters, or go through social media and subscribe to different pages so I can continue to learn. It's actually an individual journey. So if I'm going to go and ask somebody, hey, tell me about your South Asian heritage, then I'm not really taking responsibility and accountability for my curiosity. So curiosity is somewhat of an individual task. It can be done in groups, like with like-minded folks, to kind of engage in, like, in a book talk or something like that. But really, that curiosity is about one's own personal journey. So I think about it as, I'm going to use this protocol that Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who is a multicultural children's literature professor, talks about. And she talks about it as characters of stories and this curiosity of characters. But I'd like to talk about it in terms of what I'm speaking about, inclusive networking. She talks about mirrors and windows and sliding doors. So I think about curiosity as a mirror. What do I know about myself and others? And that window of opportunity is that curiosity of, what do I need to learn about others? And that learning is my responsibility. Also, when we're curious, it means that we take on multiple perspectives. That, let's say, a very basic example might be, okay, I am doing an interview, and I notice that a candidate is not perhaps giving eye contact in the way that I would expect, or not providing responses in the way I expect. So instead of being judgmental, I'm curious as to their thought process or what's guiding their, cultural values of an interview. Curiosity may also take place in the same way we can think about, different food customs and different behavioral patterns. So remaining curious as to these differences rather than judgmental, and then continuing to do our own learning. And that curiosity really has to start with ourselves, because if we don't know ourselves very well, it's difficult to be curious about others. And so it's kind of like being open to new experiences, being open to new information that's presented to us without making judgments. Yeah, that's what I would say is the curiosity. Does that make sense?
Yes. And so I think that's a good starting point in a way for people to really digest this and understand it, is that, okay, when you see something, instead of being judgmental, say, I wonder what their perspective is, right? And to think about it from a different perspective versus an automatic judgment. And that really leads me to this online space, right? So we're always scrolling and we're looking at things and we're thinking about, people from the perspective of what they show us online. And so as you move into this second one, which is the creativity, how do we translate that to the work that we do online? Because you said, you had to do this shift in 2020. And most of network marketing is online, and we have to work with teams. We have to talk to people that we don't know via online spaces. And so how do we start to work in that creativity online?
Absolutely. So I think if you are an inclusive networker and you're using social media, it's really thinking about your target audience as well, right? And I just had a call with somebody about branding and marketing prior to this podcast, and really thinking about, who is my audience? How do I connect with them? And a big part of that is authenticity. So how do I show up as my authentic self or authentic brand or authentic company and share something with folks. We don't have to be perfect in our creativity. Creativity is about trying things, and we're not always going to get it right, and not being afraid of that failure. So for me, creativity might be, what I did after switching virtually is I started doing IG Lives in September of 2020. And I did about 12 of them until it got, okay, that's enough for me. And I started to do IG Lives, conversations with, people who are in the equity space, people who are solopreneurs and entrepreneurs, to learn about their business at the intersections of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so that was kind of one way where I would engage folks and provide some free content and learn myself and provide learning. Then I pivoted and I said, okay, I'm done with this now. Then I pivoted to doing a podcast. And so I did 12 episodes of a podcast. I'm on a bit of a pause from that because I'm working on other things. But it's about trying new things, and it's about putting yourself out there. And then also learning about what your clients want, what your users want, what your viewers want, right? And being creative in that way. And that could mean many different things. For me, for example, when I work with companies and I tell them to be creative, I tell them to use curiosity with that creativity. So I tell them to kind of look at some of the data in that way. So for example, how many people with disabilities do you see in marketing and advertising? And why is that? And how can we be creative in our casting, creative in our social media, creative in our branding to include the voices of people with disabilities, for example, and be advocates for disability justice? That's just one example. And we can think about all the aspects of oppression in that way. And really that creativity is also about, how do I stand out and what am I doing differently? Right? We see a lot of social media pages that are maybe sensationalizing topics or using fancy colors or fancy branding, but what makes you stand out? And that goes back to that curiosity of who you are. And then again, back to what I said earlier, are we sticking with fads, or are we continuously doing the commitment and the work in our creative endeavors through social media, through marketing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And so as we think about this with back to your original teaching, right? And when we're doing this with team building, what are some ways to really be creative and make sure that our team is on the same page with being an inclusive networker?
Absolutely. So I think the first step is that making sure that everyone has access to some sort of basic training or understanding. Because if we're asking a team to be inclusive or create inclusive marketing, but they either don't know what the return on investment is for them or the company, if they don't know what that means, they don't even have the basic fundamentals, it's going to be difficult for them. So provide some sort of training and education to folks, right? Coming with that teaching and coaching bit to ensure that they understand the baseline. Then understand, what is the commitment? Is there a strategy in place? Do we have a strategy? Can we create a strategy? And for that, another C is collaboration, right? It's really important to get your team to collaborate on a vision because it has to mean something to them. If we're trying to move a team along and there's no sense of collaboration or accountability or some sort of connection to that work, it will be very difficult. So that's really important. And so what I've found with some organizations is I might support them in creating like a marketing and communication guide for inclusive marketing and communication. And then I might do a train the trainer model where I teach them, how do you now integrate these principles in your work? So let's look at a sample of maybe a marketing, an ad that went out. Let's look at this and let's really have a checklist or a rubric or a scorecard and, break it down and say, was it inclusive? Why or why not? And let's learn together. The other thing that I think is really important is to be open to new ideas. I've heard some folks who want to be inclusive say, but Sheliza, we've always done things this way. That costs too much money and takes too much time. And that is the long-term commitment, right? So being open to new ideas and diverse perspectives. That can also come with your hiring within your inclusive team, right? Whether you're a solopreneur that's going to outsource folks or whether you're an organization, is the team that's working on these projects with you diverse itself in terms of perspective, in terms of identity, in terms of ability? Are they able to bring those unique contributions to your team? I think that is also really key. So I think all of those kind of put together are some like tangible ways to think about that. The training, the implementation, some checklists, ensuring that you have measurable metrics, and ensuring that you have a diverse team itself, and everyone is committed and understands what the work is that needs to be done.
Yes, I love the 4 C's of DEI, right? So, as we're thinking about this, and what would you tell a person, like, if they feel like they're stuck, they're really wanting to build this diverse network of clients and customers and team members, but they just don't know where to start? Where do we start? How do you even get this going?
Yeah. So how do you kind of create a network of, diverse followers? So I think it starts, again, taking some time. And I think it starts by connecting and networking. So just the way that you and I kind of networked and communicated, I might say that LinkedIn is a great way to engage people in some conversations. So share some of the work you're doing. Be very vulnerable. I really believe in vulnerability, and say, like, I'm looking to learn more and diversify, without being tokenizing, like, can I touch your hair? Rather, put it out there. There's also a lot of groups and associations you can join. So Facebook groups, or, open Slack channels or LinkedIn groups that you can join to kind of learn more. And if you search some of those up on Facebook or LinkedIn, you'll find some. So be in these groups where you can kind of have conversations, or start your own group and tap a few folks on the shoulder to be part of a group with you, so you can continue to have these discussions. Then you can kind of, if you have a newsletter, you can try to, entice people to sign up to your newsletter. You can do a podcast like you're doing, Dr. Raymona, to kind of engage people to attend to the work. Or if you say, I don't know how to do any of those things, start the IG Live and just say, I'd like to have a conversation, and either pull in speakers or just start talking yourselves. And slowly, I would also say, if you're trying to do it on social media or even LinkedIn, what I would say is, if you search for people who have pages or work that you aspire to have, and start following them and absorbing their content, and start kind of a tree of following, that's one way. On LinkedIn, once I noticed, it has these algorithms of what I'm connected to, it'll suggest for me other practitioners. And so I can add those different practitioners in the group. So many different ways: LinkedIn groups, Facebook groups, starting, private Slack channel groups, or doing IG Lives is another way to get there. Joining as an attendee to IG Lives, having conversations, and really starting conversations as well online, and then following people. I think those are some great ways to kind of start to build the network, and then it slowly comes. And of course, now that things are opening back up, going to some of those in-person socials or networking, definitely everyone can join the Harvard Alumni Entrepreneurs Global, or if you're in Canada, you can join the Canada chapter. There's chapters all throughout the U.S. of different cities. It's free to join for the first year, things like that, where you can meet people. It's all about that networking piece and the learning and curiosity.
Absolutely. Well, Sheliza, I am so very excited that you joined us on the Inclusive Networker. So you have such amazing wisdom and so much information. And so how in the world do we keep in touch with you? What is your next big project? How can the Inclusive Networker audience benefit from being connected to you in some way?
Thank you so much. Well, we actually have a really exciting program that we're launching in January 2023 that is Leading for Equity and Justice. And this 6-week program is geared toward folks who are working in education, so as teachers, administrators, support workers, or working in parallel education fields like education coordinators, or even in DEI education. And this 6-week program is going to be virtual, so folks can join from wherever, and you're going to really learn about leadership. It's actually focused for specifically Indigenous, Black, and people of color, so it's going to be a community space intentionally designed in that way, where we're going to talk about radical self-love and healing. What does that mean when we're seeking out leadership? How do we seek out leadership? How do we gain mentorship? And we're also going to provide that mentorship and coaching. So that's a really great program. You can find out more on our website, curatedleadership.com. Also, you can keep in touch with us and get free resources and about our events and special offers by signing up for our newsletter. You can do that on our website, as well as visit us on social media at Curated Leadership on IG and Twitter and LinkedIn. We're really excited to partner with you and to share our stories and listen to our podcast and connect with us for some one-on-one coaching.
Thank you so much, Sheliza. This has been an awesome conversation. I love everything that you have said, and I know that it will be so beneficial to the Inclusive Networker community. So everyone, thank you so much for listening. Yes, thank you for listening to this episode of The Inclusive Networker. And thank you to my fabulous guest, Sheliza Jamal. You will find her information in the show notes, and we will see you on the next episode of The Inclusive Networker. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Inclusive Networker. You can find out all the information for our fabulous guest today in the show notes. But don't forget to subscribe to the Inclusive Networker podcast and to look out for a new episode each week on YouTube and wherever you enjoy your podcast. This is your host, Dr. Raymona. And as always, remember, I see you and I'm cheering you on. And I dare you to defy limits. See you on the next episode of The Inclusive Networker.